Thanks so much for having me. I'm really, really delighted to be a part of this. And growing up, I would never have imagined the level of excitement that I would feel talking about deafness, because for so long it was this an immense secret that I had. And so much of what Allah said, I completely relate to. I spent the vast majority of my life passing as a hearing person and really downplaying any difficulties I had with hearing and communication. So I'll kind of go back to the beginning. I was 6 years old when my teacher at school noticed that often my copybooks were completely blank. I would sit in class, and much like Allah with being a space cadet, I was very quiet and seemingly studious, but nothing at all was sinking in. But because I was so well behaved, I could slide through the cracks quite well until it got to the point where I was about to go into year 2, and it was pretty apparent that I was completely illiterate. I couldn't even spell my own name, which is kind of prompted the teacher to speak to my mum, to say, I think she has a learning disorder. Perhaps she should go get tested. So at that stage, they didn't know why I couldn't read and write. Because I coped fairly well. I could speak fluently, and I seemed to be well adjusted socially. So it could have been any possibilities. So I went to an early childhood testing centre, did a whole bunch of tests of stacking blocks and looking at different colours and numbers and speaking tests. And at the end of the day, I did a hearing test. And I can vividly remember, which I'm sure many of us, if not all of us, have had that experience of stepping into that little booth, putting on those really hard headphones that really stick into your skull, and being given the small pressing button. And as being so diligent and studious, I took this test very seriously. And I can remember my hands being really sweaty as I pressed on the button and I listened to all the sounds. And I thought I did pretty well. I was like, yep, that was the easiest test of all the tests. This is wonderful. And then that afternoon, I was diagnosed as being profoundly deaf in my left ear. At that stage, there was no treatment for it. There's no hearing aids powerful enough to produce any level of functional hearing in that ear. And they weren't doing cochlear ear implants for unilateral hearing loss. That's something that happens widely now. So I think if the circumstances occurred today, more than likely my parents would have been strongly encouraged to have me implanted. But at that stage, the audiologist looked at my mum and said, she seems like a good girl, she'll be fine. And I was sent on my way. And that was that, which obviously it wasn't that at all. Going back to school, my mum at that point recognized that I was still really struggling with the basics. I didn't have any support in the classroom whatsoever. So she kind of stepped up to become my teacher at home. She worked full time. I was the youngest of 4 kids. So this was an immense amount of responsibility that she took on to teach me how to read and write, because I just wasn't getting that support in a public school. Funnily enough, the school had a deaf unit in the school, which was a small classroom with children with disabilities, but it was mostly focused on deafness, and they had Auslan instruction. But at that stage, like is still very much the case, Auslan was considered the last resort. So I wasn't given the opportunity to go to that class. And at that time, I was really proud. I thought, I'm better than them. I can speak. I'm obviously so much better than anyone who uses sign language. And that's a real shame that I have now, that I have this real perception of different types of deafness and who can call themselves deaf and who's allowed to learn sign language. So it wasn't until my late 20s that I even considered the idea of learning sign language. I had this real perception, which was kind of fed on by the audiologists, that only certain people were allowed to learn sign language. And because I was only half deaf, I was okay and I would be fine. So I had this real idea of that as soon as I learned to read and write, I had overcome my deafness. And that was something I was tremendously proud of. I really thought that I had beaten my deafness, and I didn't really see it as a part of my identity or who I was. And I didn't recognize until much, much later how much deafness has formed my identity, from my personality to how I structure my day to how I engage and interact with people on so many levels. I just assumed that was who I was. I didn't really kind of realize or reckon with of how deaf I am in personality and attitude. And I mean that in the kindest and happiest way now. I feel really proud to be deaf and to speak to other deaf people, because just like Alice said, there are so many similarities and overlaps to how we approach the world, how we are so flexible and intelligent with finding out information that isn't readily available to us, whether that's asking key questions to kind of pull out information that we miss, or being really flexible in how we set ourselves up in rooms that are really loud and noisy, and how we use the environment to help us, and cues. And I became an absolute bookworm. For a long time, I didn't realize that that was my way of acquiring information in a way that felt comfortable to me and wasn't exhausting. It's only recently that I realized how exhausted I am all the time. Again, I thought everyone had headaches at the end of the day. I assumed it was normal to come home from work and collapse on the couch and not be able to watch TV or talk to people. And just, I needed to be alone for so many hours of the day. And that's really a reflection of how much work I do when I go out into the world and I talk to other people. I need to rest and recover. But the difference now of knowing this is I can plan for my week and my days in a way that's meaningful. So I'm not crashing and burning out time and time again. I was in this real cycle, particularly in my 20s, where I was so determined to socialize and work hard and play hard and just be in the world, that every few months I would become absolutely bedridden with infections and illness and just literally burn out. And now knowing that my deafness does impact my life, I account for it in a way that feels important and empowering rather than something that is disruptive. It is something that I am getting better at, talking about it and advocating for myself. Like Alice said, I constantly worry and stress about work opportunities and financial security, and the idea that my occupation at the moment as a physiotherapist does involve so much listening and communication. So I'm still very much grappling with how to find a career path that suits my body, but also suits the aspirations that I have with work. And I don't think that's going to be sort of I don't think I'm going to reach a point where it's a clear cut pathway at all. I think it's going to constantly change, particularly as technology changes as well, and the impacts of that. But I think these conversations are so useful to have because we've all picked up a lot of skills along the way that I feel like I've learned so much from deaf people about what it means to be deaf, more so than from any medical person or audiologist. Real tricks and tips of how to survive in the world has come from other people who've lived that experience. And I just hope that I keep learning and picking up more information along the way, because it's absolutely changed my life, making friends with deaf people. It makes me feel less alone. And I think we all have a similar sense of humor and attitude towards it. So I'm really, really excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to asking you all many questions at the end. Thank you.